twigs.
I want to see a whole bunch of these things popping up because there's a red kind of candle thing. I hope it was wax, but if it wasn't, it looks like a fossilized internal organ. And I wouldn't want someone who made a grave have it be diffracting out of the dirt from on top of it. As yesterday I talked about, the most random thing would be if your guts were in no desolate position and your skin was not on the outside and your bones were on the outside of the, because it's an abstract concept, very much like strings. Fabric in terms of skin is actually one where Leatherface would use it as a fabric, when in turn that would lead one to believe that a pine or a porcupine is no different than that as well. But you're saying that it's quills. Could that be conceptualized as part of a fabric if it was skinned? Absolutely. No different than a pine cone if it was skewed down and condensed out to be a spider web. So at first glance, it's pretty solid, where it's not diffracting quite as great as a free-flowing photon would, despite it having all the colors of it, the photon's electromagnetic spectrum. All the wave functions have a rainbow. But if you were to go further away, perhaps a mile or two, and do that same exact angle, you very well may see those wordings of the cursive diffracted through the lines. The best to claim is that for the smallest constituent, there's a rule that abides it to be a staple. This is the 8-octate rule for an electron, where it's either trying to make it at 8 and an octate's like an octagon, shape around an atom, or to be fall into a ground state. So it's just like one or the other. If it's a switch, it's being switched on into the atom forming a certain shape, no matter what orbital it is. The electrons have like a handful of orbitals, probably 5, and then the 8-octate is a ground for any of them where it's trying to achieve that, an octagon. And or flipping it off, they're running down into a ground state of 0, where they're trying to find the very bottom of the nucleus. And that could be either its interior or as far as its exterior. So the ground state is either inside the atom or outside of the atom, and achieves the ground state by the 8-octate rule, getting the orbitals as like the median. So the median of the electron in the 8-octate rule utilizes the orbitals to find the ground state, either in its interior or its exterior. I call them over accentuations, and that's only because you can house wave functions between 2 over accentuations. And the difference between an orbital and a wave function is basically just a wave function mimicking a Boy's surface. Now, funny you asked that. What is a Boy's surface? It is an envelope within an envelope. And I know that's abstract. You get the 2 for 1, and that's why it resonates so well with over accentuations. Ground state on either end. You're going to have yourself a wave function derived from orbitals. Spectacular, but the electron is always confused because the off switch, it's never settled unless it can achieve its 8-octate. Where we're at now is, when I was growing up, there was the computers, they were around, and then the internet came. A lot of people, didn't get on the boat, and they just had all this problems with understanding computers, giant discord. Nowadays, it's moving from that, and they're doubling down into what is biodegradable, what are biohazards, and a whole bunch of people still don't understand what's behind the internet. Knock on wood that at least you have something that you could utilize that'd actually be more easy to see the geometrics if you could use x-rays to look at the tendons of your fingers, where they're kind of like pterodactyl or bat bones that you can see them on the outside of their wings, but with the strings mimicking the tendons within your fingers as they're strapped into a cat's cradle, gives an angle that is, if it were flattened, iconic to the wings of bones on pterodactyl or bats that you see on its outsides. That's one angle that would be differentiated as a sweet spot for seeing an encryption, whereas from its front end, you get a completely different image. This is how things are acclimated when it comes to encryption. And an encryption has a decoding through diffraction, almost as if your entire body has a purpose besides the cells making it be able to have a body. So how strong is a biohazard is how much a biodegradable could be withstood. If you're saying something like, I want every cell in my body not to be hazard waste product, that's merely impossible, because you can't keep every cell. When you hit your head on something, some of your brain cells die. So how safe are biohazards, given the fact that everything is biodegradable if induced to enough chaos? A splitting image of what light is made white from, a whole bunch of perforated glass as a collective from a distance doubles as just one square. This is an interplay of light's interchange off the angles within its construct. And even if ghosts aren't real, it's something that of a life force that needs to be taken into consideration within consciousness and becoming unconsciousness when you're losing cellular activity, when intertwining with what the internet has behind it in lieu of understanding biodegradables and biohazards. So ghosts are a perfect representation of an example of the interplay between the two, which is why it can't be left out when understanding IP addressing and bit coding. A white ghost and a black one. The interplay of light and chaotic structures that are random are something that can't be taken for granted, especially if you're having all the life sucked out of cells. That would be the generic form of what a biohazard is. It's just a daunting image that there's people who believe there are ghosts about, when this is the splitting image of what would be a biohazard in terms of light, where they're utilizing light to reform an image without cellular structures. On the internet, there are some things that are ghosts but completely black. These are called, with fancy names, aberrations. They're a different breed of biohazard. If the light was a biohazard and then they're imitating that through shadows, so there would be two categories of life sucked out. The crossover between the two can be thought up as fairy tales, where some of the most crazy things you've ever heard would be the definition of connecting the two. Something as crazy as a liquefied materialization. But in a closer look, it's nothing different than the hooks and rods of a cuckoo clock sewn with magnetism and excited through the physical's inert state being resignated. You know, the olden day batteries were made with like liquid and metal plates, and I think that's what the lithium batteries nowadays are trying to invocate, and I think that is a great crossover for a giant arena. There are sacred geometries, that of which are in fulfillments like the 8-octave rule and time being in third dimension. In order to obtain a maximum capacity for the most basic constituent, you need a polar opposite with the most complex enactments. So what departments could do those two fittings properly, hashtag fit proper, is the computer science, the most basic coding, and then engineering, the physicality with the binary.